If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, police, security guards, etc., have you ever been called out only to realize it was a seemingly paranormal incident? What happened? Unarmed security for a residential building here. This is extremely tame compared to some of the other stories here, but this is a pretty salient subject, and I have evidence. My site has a rooftop pool, and it's really one of the only major things the management gets anal about when it's supposed to be closed. On a chilly night not too long ago, I was posted up in the rooftop stairwell staying warm when I hear a crescendoing fit of laughter that goes to the point where the laugher is gasping and choking. Kind of weird, but not a big deal considering that people throw parties and whatnot all the time, and I could tell it wasn't close enough to be someone horsing around in the pool. Then I just start hearing a bunch of shrieking, and the source of the noise is moving around. At this point I step out, and I realize it's coming from the rooftop itself, locked up and only accessible by non-security by scaling a concrete wall. The noise stops and I try to start zeroing from where exactly on this dark, slippery, cold-ass roof the noises were coming from. Then I see some footprints on the roof that were not there before. Barefoot prints with no heel print, tiptoeing. Footprints that are dirtier than the surface of the roof itself. Noped my way right back inside because it was an hour before clock out. My sister has been a nurse for about 8 years in Southern and now Northern California. Worked in hospitals, med-surg, tele, ICU, dialysis centers, and now a hospice nurse. She has a few stories from the hospital, things like children laughing, shadows, patients claiming they saw another dead patient when they had never met. One of the creepiest that she and the other nurses told me was about a patient complaining and scared that something was under their bed. He was older and confused, so they didn't think much of it. Checked on him, responded to the multiple calls, and just tried to make him feel better. The next day, a new patient went into that room, another older person but not confused, and called to complain about something under his bed. They sort of brushed it off again after checking. The next night, a new patient in his 20s and completely coherent called crying that something kept running under his bed. They checked and found nothing, but the patient was in such distress and shaking, they moved him. Happened quite a few other times as well. They never found anything, but that was so creepy to me. Not sure if this is paranormal or not, but we live together now and she works as a hospice nurse. Every so often, she would scream or I'd hear her struggle or make weird noises in the middle of the night. I'd go to check and she'd tell me it was sleep paralysis. And explain what happened, that she saw a specific patient in her episode standing over her and growling, crying, or screaming. Always a very scary dream. The next day, that patient would die. Happened about 13 times so far. Trips me out. I am a police officer in large city. There are housing projects in my sector that house low-income residents and also some suffering from mental health issues. There's an elderly Haitian woman who calls late at night and swears she can hear ghosts and voodoo spirits in her residence. The first time I showed up with my partner, I told her I would go in and speak with the ghosts and close the bedroom for about 5 minutes, then opened it and she hesitantly entered with me. I told her I asked them to leave and they need her permission to come back. She celebrated and said she can no longer see them and thanked us. This woman is otherwise quite articulate and intelligent and always refuses medical help. She will call 911 periodically every 3 to 4 months for similar reasons, and I'll go in with a water bottle with no label and go in and have her point the location where she saw them, and I sprinkle some holy water in the area and she thanks us and offers us food. We always politely decline and exit the residence. Lol, you might not believe me, but at Universal Studios Hollywood, the lower lot, we use golf carts or Ford Explorers to patrol. There is a golf cart that drives itself at night. We have the number of the cart on camera, and I shit you not, it's been no operational for over 6 years. Someone wrecked it on lot. Thing drives around Jaw Lake and residential area at night. Scary shit as I patrol up there a lot for my swing shift, never seen it, but cameras catch it zooming past yous when we are driving. Lol. Marine stationed in Japan back in 2010-12. I was military police. One night around 2 to 3 a.m. we hear over the radio, any units seeing the light over the water south? It was a Marine air station based on the southern tip of Japan. We had no flights coming in or going out that night. Everyone knew there shouldn't be a light flying over the waters. So about 3 patrol cars met up at the airfield where there was a way better view. Sure as shit there's a light sitting out over the water blinking slowly off and on. Some guys tried to say it was a star, so we had traffic control cameras from dispatch zoom in on it. Turns out it was slowly moving out of the cameras. So while by AO we couldn't tell it was moving, the cameras picked it up. We sat there kind of amazed for an hour before it went away. As we were getting back into the squad car, I took a last look at the night sky and saw a small light dart behind some clouds in a movement that didn't make sense. I didn't tell the other guys, just thought there's no way they would believe me. Months later I was running on the sea wall and stopped to lay down and catch my breath. Again saw a light, watched it drive into some clouds and then disappear. That was around the time of the tsunami and Fukushima. Super weird. Not a responder, but lived next door to one who is very famous in our hometown for his alien abduction, but there are other stories, too. This all went down in the 80s, rural England, and my memory of the exact details are fuzzy. Been a while since anyone has bothered discussing it, small hometown and everyone knows and is over it. The alien abduction story is that he was on the way back from a call out, saw some odd lights on the road ahead and had to stop, a one-track road. He went to investigate the lights as any good police officer does, and next thing he knows it's a half hour later and he's back in his car seat, car facing the other way, some odd substance on him, no lights to be seen. The police dispatch also confirmed that his radio frequency just disappeared for that half hour. The substance was tested and didn't match any known profile. I really have no idea what that really means or what tests were. At around the same time, this officer and some others were called out by a farmer whose cows had disappeared. Yes, very stereotypical cows in a tractor beam story. But the farmer reported them missing, multiple police show up, gate is locked and no cows. They all decide to drive around looking for the cows. The paranormal magnet officer reports that thing where you keep trying to drive somewhere but always end up back where you were when it shouldn't be possible on his route, but they all convene back at the field at the end of shift. The cows are back, though none of the officers found them and nobody called in to find them. And remember, paranormal officer has seemingly been driving past the field on a loop all night. The farmer was also unaware when they called to ask him. Totally sounds like the farmer pulled a prank, except it was raining that night and there was loads of wet mud building at the edge of the field where the gate is, and not footprints or hoof prints, and the cows were dry, too. I was a caregiver in a retirement home for 6 months at the beginning of the pandemic. We had one patient, let's call them Robert, that was mute, so when they called us because they needed something, of course we would just hang up and go to their rooms. I had been on vacation for a week and my coworkers and I didn't have the chance to go over what had happened while I was away. We had 24 patients for 2 caregivers, so we would split the unit in half, 12 residents for each caregiver, and we would help the other if needed. So, the first shift after my vacation, I was taking care of Robert's unit. Few minutes after I arrived, I got a call from Robert's room. So, I hang up, finish with my current patient and calmly walk to the room. When I arrived, the door was locked, which was really unusual since Robert usually leaves the door open. I knock, unlock the door and open it. To my surprise, the room was pitch black except the television that was turned on. It took me a few minutes to realize that Roberts wasn't in the room. So, I called my coworker and asked, "Have you seen Roberts?" And that's when they told me, "Oh. Yeah. He passed away 2 days ago." Alright, weird, but not the first time that our system glitches like that and we get a phone call in an empty room. I go on with my shift, like nothing happened. I had left the door open. When I was helping another patient walk to the kitchen, when we passed Robert's room, they said, "Hi Robert, I thought you were at the hospital. Welcome back." I was 100% convinced that the room was haunted now. We would get a call from that room a few times a week until Roberts was buried, and after that, nothing else happened in that room. We've also had another patient calling us because there was Mike sitting in his chair every night. Mike was the name of the patient that passed away in that room. They had never met. My dad used to work at a military fortress. He wasn't serving or anything, but his company such that it was based there, and as such they had custodial duties to the base. One occasion I remember him going on about was around New Year one year, and he was working quite late, so it was dark when he left. TBH, I think it was only around 7 p.m, but the sun sets at like 3:30 p.m. in that part of the world in winter. On the drive home he realized he'd forgotten his phone, so he turned around to go and get it. He parked up and walked through the glassy, over the drawbridge and through the arch, which brought him into the main square from where his office was visible on the top floor of the block on the right. He noticed then that the light was still on in one of the end rooms of the office. I recall it was some kind of store room. It was odd, he thought, because he'd been the last one out and had locked up, so his first thought was that he'd locked someone in. When he got up there, though, the lights were all off and nobody was about. He received his phone in quick order and left in a little more than a hurry. There were other happenings too which didn't involve my dad. On one occasion his boss came in one morning to complaints from the night cleaner accusing him of peeking at him from behind doors and hiding, giggling and flicking lights on and off, which was obviously a surprise because he'd been at home all night. The army occupied other floors in the block, and other blocks on the camp, and often complained about loud parties from the office which never happened, plus soldiers regularly seeing apparitions among countless other spooky things. I had just finished my initial military training, Basic, 8, a few other classes, and got sent to my first duty station. My unit was at NTC for pre-deployment training, so I met up with the rear echelon. I get issued my room and spent 3 very disturbed days/nights in the barracks with weird stuff happening, like gear not where I left it, locked drawers being opened, the microwave turning on by itself. Shit like that. My roommate, who I knew throughout training, showed up on the 4th day and I told him something along the lines of, "Watch your shit. Someone's been ducking with my stuff and I don't know who." So the 4th night comes around and myself and my roommate secure our room and gear and go to bed. Gotta be up at 0530 for PT, so it's an early night. We lock all our stuff and go to bed. I woke up around 0100 cause my blanket had fallen to the ground and I was cold, which was weird cause we were in the south in summer, so it's always hot. I hop down to get my blanket and I notice my armoire is open, so I open the lock, close it, lock it, and get back to bed. I fell back asleep pretty easy, but I woke up again at about 0230 and all my stuff and my roommate's stuff is thrown around the room. I wake up my roommate and he's pissed cause someone is ducking with us and can't figure out who it is. We clean it up, lock our stuff and go back to bed. I woke up a third time at 0337 and we're not alone. I can hear my roommate snoring, so I know it's not him. I sat up and saw someone in the little kitchenette area with the fridge open looking in it. I was freezing again. I was about to say something as the soldier turned around. My eyes had a moment to adjust to the bright light and then I started recognizing gear like the L-shaped flashlight on his shoulder, his Alice pack with magazine holders and canteens, boots and fatigues. This dude was combat ready. As my eyes reached his face, he turned a bit and I could see it. Half his head and helmet were gone. Blown off by the looks of it. I'm scared shitless at this point. He closed the fridge, walked across the room keeping his bright green eyes on, opened my front door and walked out. As he exited, he turned back around and said to me, "Be safe." I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I didn't wake my roommate up. I just sat up in bed for about 2 hours till I had to get ready for PT. 0630 rolls around, so everyone is outside the barracks in formation getting ready to start PT, and the acting first sergeant says, "Hey, Notches, you good? Looks like you saying a ghost." I replied with, "Negative, I'm fine, 1SG good to go." About halfway through PT he comes up to me and asks me what's wrong because I'm visibly shaken up. I told him I was fine, just couldn't sleep last night. A few others asked if I was okay and I just lied and said I was fine. I really wasn't and they could see that, but they let me be. After PT ended, the acting 1SG pulled me to the side and told me to speak freely, openly, and with all confidentiality and off the record. What is wrong? I told him that if I told him what happened he would think I'm batshit crazy. He assured me it was off record and once again said, "Talk to me. You seriously look like you've seen a ghost." That got an awkward chuckle out of me and I began to tell him my story, and when I got to the part about his head, the acting 1SG lost his shit. "Who the duck put you up to this? This is not funny, etc., etc." He smoked me for about 30 minutes, made me do push-ups, mountain climbers, stuff like that, all while yelling at me that I'm a piece of shit. Finally, after about 30 minutes of that, he says, "Look at me in the eye and swear on everything that you love that you're not lying to me." I told him I was not lying. It duckin' happened. So he says, "Follow me," so I do. We get to the command office, which I had never been in, and they were obviously locked. He takes me behind 3 locked doors and 3 rooms I had never stepped foot in, and when he opened the last door I saw it. It gave me chills. It still gives me chills, but plain as day there's the soldier's portrait behind the commander's desk. I froze and said, "That's him." Acting 1SG, the guy who assigned me that room, told me who it was. He was a corporal in the unit on my unit's first deployment to Iraq, and he died in an IED attack that took off part of his head. I was the first soldier to be assigned that room since it belonged to the deceased corporal. He forgave me and I forgave him, and he told me some stories about who this guy was. I deployed with that unit just a couple months later and spent 12 months fighting in that shithole. I nearly died I don't know how many times, my vehicle got hit with IEDs and rockets, and it always made me think of that corporal. I survived more things than most people can image, and I always felt like that corporal was keeping an eye out for me. Not everyone in my unit was as lucky as me. 3 from my company didn't get to come home. Also worked a lot of nights, and there's only one that legit put the shivers up me. Just before 6 a.m. on a general healthcare of the elderly ward, 2 staff nurses, 1 auxiliary and me, a student. 4 bays, but 1 was closed and just had the usual ward junk stored in it, obs machines, drip stands, transfer equipment, spare bed tables, etc. 2 nurses are in the bay setting up the morning IVs and I'm in the other bay doing 6 a.m. BMs. Auxiliary goes off to get an OBS machine. He comes into the bay with the weirdest look on his face. When I'm done with the blood glucose check I'm in the middle of, he says in an undertone, "Come and look at this." He leads me into the empty bay. There are wet footprints on the floor, starting halfway across the room. Now I know what you're thinking, he did it himself, or it was a wandering patient. That's what I'm tempted to think, too. Except the footprints went under a table and stopped at the window. No return footprints, no little jiggle like someone had put on shoes whilst standing on one foot, just straight up to the window. And they were small, and the auxiliary was a big bloke. Now, there's a chance it was one of the patients from a side room who snuck by us, went into the closed bay with the sign saying no entry, somehow wet their feet, walked to the window and put their shoes back on, and then carefully moved the table over it. But it honestly seems rather far-fetched. Almost all of the patients on that ward had limited mobility and about half wouldn't have had the capacity to do such a complicated chain of events, either. Definitely gave us all the shudders and we were happy when the early shift came in. I was working night shifts as a security guard from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. in a 2-story office building that had probably 50 to 80 workers all in cubicles during the day. It was only myself there during the night. I was stationed at the front door where their switchboard desk is and I do a patrol of the entire building every 2/3 hours. I always heard weird thuds and people walking. I even checked to see if I was right, usually I'd hear something around 3:15 a.m. I ended up getting used to it since nothing was ever there. The weirdest thing that happened was on my third patrol roughly around 3:30 am. As I walked on the second story I noticed some of the ceiling tiles were gone and 2 of the roof hatches were completely open. I didn't notice any of this on my earlier patrols. When I told morning staff they had no idea why. Later I talked to the other guard who used to work there for years, older gentleman and religious. Hess also noticed many weird things but he didn't want to talk about it. Other things have happened such as computer screens coming on. Coffee machines turning on randomly. Radios randomly turning on. Couple times I'd sworn things were moved because it looked different from earlier patrols. It was an easy gig but I'm sure the place was haunted by something. I worked as private security for a hotel under construction in 2019. My shift was from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. It was some real FNAF shit. I was a level 1 guard so I couldn't carry anything beside a flashlight. Of course, I didn't adhere to that rule. The construction workers left the site by 4 p.m. so I was on my own. Sometimes the drywall guy would stay late and we would smoke his weed pen. He usually left by 8 p.m. I would usually spend my shifts in either my brown SUV, that kind of helped me blend in the background and catch intruders off guard, or in one of the half-furnished hotel rooms and do a full site sweep every hour. My first day went fine, a little boring but there was nothing to report. I used that time to walk around the whole site, all 5 floors and even the roof. The building had most of its windows aside from the safety windows at the end of each floor, so the building wasn't too secure. The second day I swore that I was hearing whispering. This was a bad part of town so I feared getting shanked with a needle more than ghosts. I checked each floor, every nook and cranny, every hour, on the hour till I left at 6 p.m. The whispering continued on the third day. It sounded ethereal like, I felt like I could have made out a syllable every once in a while. I have a religious background so I feel pretty safe from what's out there. On my 4th day I met the drywall guy and we talked about the site and shot the shit for about an hour till he left, but not before I got the highest I've ever been in my life at that point, but I digress. I asked if he's ever heard or seen any suspicious activity while he stayed late. He told me of some homeless and thieves they had to chase out, hence the reason I was hired I guess. I asked if he's had any creepiness happen to him as well and he gave an anecdote of hearing laughter and talking sometimes when he's not paying attention. The rest of the night went well because I kept my high ass in the SUV and watched Iron Man 1 and 2. The 6th day was different. The drywall guy wasn't there when I arrived in shift so I was on my own. I didn't hear the whispering at all until about 1 a.m. I was on the 3rd floor walking room to room, in almost total darkness aside from my flashlight, when I heard a light sniffling like when you have a cold. I froze in place and just listened trying to hear for details. That's what being raised by a Marine does. The sniffles continued for about 2 minutes. Then it built up to a light weep like a girl who scraped her knee, or like the witch from Left 4 Dead. I slowly made my way to the staircase to follow the sound. It sounded like it was coming from the 1st floor. As I was about to enter the stairwell I heard a huge and sudden bang from where the weeping was coming from. It sounded like scaffolding toppled or a printer fell over. After the demonic jump scare, I froze and listened to see if I can hear running or shuffling or anything. Nothing. I slowly made my way to the 1st floor and checked for any sign of damage. There was nothing. I did my rounds as usual but totally on edge. The next day was uneventful, light whispering but nothing of note. A few days later at about 11 p.m., I was sitting in my SUV facing the lobby of the building when I thought I saw movement in my peripheral vision. I put my phone down and looked in the direction it came from. I was about 60 feet away when suddenly, a flashlight turned on, revealing a tall man wearing a dark trench coat, bandana face cover, and was wearing a huge backpack. This guy was decked out, so I did not want to interact with him. I blasted him with my flashlight and turned on my SUV and flashed the brights. He was gone. I called the cops and had to wait a bit for them to arrive. One cop showed up and we cleared the hotel, room to room, and there was no one found. I spent about another month at that post, with not much activity occurring after that. One creepy detail about the building is, about 20 days in, I found a crawl space underneath the stairs. There was a false wall with a 7 feet wide and 5 foot tall room with drink containers and fast food bags everywhere. That post was an experience and a half. Would totally do it again, lol. My husband has a story when he was working at a jail. He and another guy were in, let's say, the security room, where they have cameras on the cells and watch the inmates. It was dead of night and they had a crazy guy by himself in one of the pods, which is a cell where lots of inmates stay. This guy was crazy enough that he got one to himself. He kept hitting the call button to talk to the guards, and every time my husband answered, the inmate would be crying and pleading for the guards to move him to a different cell. He said that something wouldn't leave him alone. Well, the guy is crazy and in there alone, so they tell him to go to sleep each time and hang up on him because they're tired of his crap. Well, right after the last time he makes the call on the two-way intercom and my husband hangs up, the inmate is holding his knees, rocking back and forth in a corner on the camera. Typical crazy guy stuff. Out of curiosity, my husband holds down the button to listen in. He hears the dude sobbing and another voice talking at the same time. Husband lets go of the button quickly and looks over at the other guard in the room with him and asks, "Did you hear that?" And the other guard is sheet white and says, "I didn't hear anything," and turns back around, refusing to say another thing about it. Did a couple of security shifts in a particular hotel as emergency replacement when their regular company had no one on hand. The regular staff of the place told me the basement was haunted and that weird stuff happened there. I also had people from my company I met on completely unrelated assignments tell me as much when I mentioned I worked some shifts in that hotel. I gotta say though, I never found anything weird or eerie inside that basement except for the 2 janitors I found sleeping inside the technical corridors. I don't think it's haunted, but there is one particular room at the residential tower I currently work at that gives me the heebie-jeebies every time I go in there. Extremely oppressive atmosphere. It's a pitch black boiler room with 3 water pits where excess rainfall collected in the drains goes to gather. It's extremely noisy with all sorts of pipes and pumps making odd noises along with the drops of water. The brain being such a fantastic pattern recognition machine, I sometimes hear those noises as voices speaking in gibberish to me. It's pretty unnerving and I never want to leave the room with my back turned to it. Former US Army, just recently got out. While my unit was at NTC National Training Center, in California, I was on guard duty in HMWV as the gunner. It was late at night, probably about 1 or 2 a.m. My secondary gunner was sitting on the radio, and decided to switch out for a minute to get some fresh air, so he didn't fall asleep. I sat on the radio for what felt like 30 minutes, and right before our guard shift was up, I heard the radio go off. I picked up the transceiver and listened in. Turns out another guard truck, that was about 100 meters to my left, saw movement and was requesting someone to confirm it. The second gunner had a M249 with a thermal scope. I pulled the scope off of the weapon and looked through trying to find exactly what they were looking at and didn't see anything. I shrugged and radioed up that it was all clear. Another 5 minutes pass of radio silence and the same guy radios up, saying he swears something's moving, and at this point we're all tired, so I'm thinking it's just because we're tired and it's dark, so his mind's probably playing tricks on him, but just for the heck of it I step outside and look directly where he's talking about. What was so creepy was that for a while, it looked all clear, but then once I pulled the scope back down again, I saw movement in the clearing. It was a massive black figure. I tell my gunner to look where I'm looking and he swears he sees it too, but just moments before I saw nothing on the thermal scope. I radio in about possible movement just in case and see a few British soldiers start making their way down there with NVG's night vision goggles, since at NTC you have the opportunity to train with foreign countries, and before they reach the area the figure completely disappears from view. Freaked me out, and to this day I still have no idea what exactly we all saw. I've been a security guard for 2 years. Around 2 months in, I was stationed at a hotel, unarmed except for OC spray, where addicts had been breaking in, trashing rooms, shooting up in rooms, and threatening staff and guests with knives. It was a relatively nice hotel in a pretty nice area, so the situation was kind of odd. My job was to patrol the halls, particularly the third and fourth floors where the incidents had been happening. This was 2020 at the start of COVID, so the guest amount was limited to maybe 30, and each floor had about 50 rooms on it. The guests were only roomed on the first 2 floors. I think the most that were ever there when I worked were 5. The hotel was shaped like a bird with a straight center strip about 50 feet long, then both hallway wings would angle back and were maybe half a football field long each. These were some long-ass hallways. It began with a room light being on every single time I arrived. There was one guy who ran the overnight front desk and one custodian who left when I got there around 10 p.m. Each one assured me that absolutely no one went up to the 3rd or 4th floor to clean or do anything. Not guests, not staff, just the attics, but there hadn't been an incident since our company was stationed there. About 20 rooms had been trashed and none of them were touched in the month I worked that site. When I'd get there, it became a routine to go up to room 439, on the left wing, and turn the light off. Sometimes it would come back on its own and I'd have to shut it off again. And these were flip switches, so they were being turned on intentionally. It wasn't an electrical issue. For maybe 2 weeks, that's all it was. Just an odd occurrence. That hallway always gave me a sick feeling, but I couldn't place why. And that room sank my stomach every time I entered it. It felt like the room from 1408, like it was going to trap me in there if I didn't hurry. It was also the only room at the end of that hallway that was untouched. 6 rooms had been broken into, 2 of which the doors were broken off the hinges, and trashed. 439? Spotless, directly in the middle of the others. Every time I checked it something was slightly out of place. A drawer would be half open, a picture crooked, a pillow off center. Didn't matter that I fixed it each time, another thing would change. My 3rd week there is when it got worse. I went to turn the light off as always and then after clearing the other floors went for my usual patrol outside. On the sidewalk at the base of the building under where 439 was, a rabbit hopped out from a bush directly in front of me, looked up at 439, then hopped away. I took it as just a cool little experience until it began happening every single time I walked the lap around the hotel, which I did every hour. I started to get the feeling that it was attempting to send me some kind of message, but I, despite being a pretty open believer of the supernatural, didn't want to believe the sick feeling I got from 439, so I brushed it off. Later that week, I was walking the floor of 439 when my flashlight began to strobe. It got worse the closer I got to the room, and upon unlocking the door and crossing the barrier to the room the flashlight died, leaving me staring into the pitch black of this room that sickened me to my core. I closed the door and went down to talk about it with the front desk clerk as we discussed supernatural occurrences the previous few weeks after the light became a constant issue, and he was determined to see this for himself. He locked the front door and followed me up to the room. I thought to myself the whole way up, great, now it's gonna work and I'm gonna look like a paranoid crazy guy. I shit you not, several steps down the hall my flashlight began to strobe and got worse as we got closer. I unlocked the door and put my hand over the barrier into the room and the light died instantly. He started freaking out and turned the light on in the room and wanted to look around. He told me he felt sick just being in the room, which is something I hadn't mentioned to him that I feel every time I've gone in that room. He decided he wanted to get out of there ASAP, and said he'd see me later. The night went on and around 4 a.m. I went into that room one final time and said, "Look, I'm done coming in here. I don't know what kind of evil shit is in here but leave me the duck alone and go back to where you came from." That was a mistake. Maybe 10 feet down the hall was the emergency staircase, which I always took back down to the first floor. 2 steps down the stairs I heard the door to 439 open and slam and loud footsteps stomping towards me. As I turned, the stairwell door opened and 3 final footsteps thundered towards me, then stopped. All I saw was the stairwell door slowly close as I stumbled down the next few steps in an absolute panic. I told the desk clerk what happened and for the final week of our contract I didn't even go down that wing of the 4th floor, and half the time I didn't even go to that floor at all. I mentioned the basics of the supernatural occurrences to my patrol supervisor and several other officers and they all told me they'd felt sick in that room too, but apparently I was the only one who antagonized whatever was in there. Oops. I have no idea what happened, but despite having had several supernatural occurrences in my life, that one was by far the most terrifying towards the end. I haven't been to that hotel since, and I'd like to keep it that way. I am an EMT, have been for a few years. I see strange shit all the time. Some of it we can make assumptions, some we have evidence of being fact, then others just make no sense no matter how you try to make it make sense. I am fairly sensitive to paranormal activity. Spirits and shit I can normally feel. We had a call one night in the middle of bum duck nowhere which was fairly normal. Suspected drug odd. We get there and it's a bunch of teenagers who all swear there was no drugs, just alcohol. We get brought to the patient that was a very, very large boy. Probably every bit of 6'8", 400 pounds or more of muscle. Kid was giant. Well, he was just looking with no emotion, no reaction to us, nothing. Well, as we're checking vitals, all of which were textbook perfect, he comes to and there's this really heavy presence. The hair on my neck stands up. And it's just weird. He gets this weird look on his face and a scary smile but says nothing. So during this time we get him into the ambulance. Once in the ambulance we start a blood draw so they can do a drug screening. We'll flash forward and he goes out again, no reaction to nothing. He comes to again and becomes violent, so we restrain him. He comes back to afterwards and breaks the restraint, so we immediately call PD for backup. Goes back out. The whole time his vitals never change. PD meets us and we continue to the hospital. He is now handcuffed to the stretcher and he comes to once more and just smiles and jumps out the back of the ambulance. At this point we contacted our medical director and dispatch and decided to transfer care to PD. They took him to the hospital and I later followed up on the call and his chem came back completely normal and they had to transfer him to a larger department, and I have no idea what happened after that, but I definitely suspect a possession. Worked security for a larger military contractor facility. The place is a small city in itself. Not my call, but was on duty when it happened. A call goes out to our North Sector patrol officer. There's a burglary alarm at a warehouse, motion detected. I then hear dispatch, be advised, I can see something moving in the yard on camera. Officer arrives, along with our shift supervisor. They can't find anything, no signs of break-in, they reset the alarm and leave. Later that night I go into the dispatch office. The dispatcher is a good friend. He says, check this out, you remember that call earlier? He shows me the video footage of the yard. There were some large wooden boxes stacked, behind them you see this distorted wolf-like head. We couldn't identify what kind of animal it was. It then ducked down behind the boxes as the responding officers arrived. The crazy thing was, on video you can see the supervisor walk behind the boxes and he was the same height as this creature. We never found out what it was and haven't seen it since that night. Working in a hospital late at night building a new cabinet for IT. On a deserted ward, all patients were 3 floors below and the only access to the ward area was via smart card or fit onto a door fob inside the doors. So, only people inside the ward can let anybody in. The layout of the ward is that it's completely open without any beds or kit in it, and the only cupboard was the one I was in, with the door propped open with a fire extinguisher. So I was working on installing the UPS, very ducking heavy, into the rack, and the door to the cupboard shuts. I think, I must have kicked the fire extinguisher or something. I put the UPS down, and open the door, and the fire extinguisher is, just, gone. I look around, and it's deserted. No noise, didn't hear anything. Fire extinguisher has just atomized into the ether. I call security, because I am potentially alone with a person who just lifted a fire extinguisher and might want to murder me with it. I ask them to check cams and sure enough, some blurry object, according to them, swooped and picked up the fire extinguisher and ran off to the left. There are only 2 doors in and out of the ward, and you need a smart card to get in and out. I checked mine was still on my person and it was. So, whatever or whomever it was must have had one or some kind of device to spoof the RFID chip reader. I had security run the access control logs, and sure enough an entry in the list corresponds with roughly the time the fire extinguisher disappeared. I never got an answer as to what happened before I left to work elsewhere. Spooky. Okay, so I, 25F, worked night shift at a maximum security psychiatric hospital. As you can probably imagine, these kind of experiences come with the territory. To set the scene for you, the hospital I work at was built in the 50s as an asylum. The concrete walls are cold and sounds echo throughout with relative ease. The pressure differentials between units and the main hall create a haunting howling sound as the air escapes through the cracks under the doors. We typically keep the lights out to encourage patients to sleep through the night. And then there's me, walking the halls alone to check that everyone is still breathing. I've heard people laughing to themselves, whispering conversations to someone unseen by me. I've even ran to emergencies where other patients have snuck into another's room to beat them violently, having to pull a 300-plus-pound man off another man he attacked in his sleep, all the while he was still stomping on his head. But the scariest thing was when I was doing a round and I came across one of our blind patients. You know how in movies you see people with hallucinations that cut their eyes out looking for relief? No, I didn't find a pair of peepers freshly gouged out, if that's what you were thinking. However, this patient had in fact done exactly this a number of years ago and as a result was completely blind. The worst part is, It didn't make the hallucinations go away. Now all he can see are the haunting visions that brought him to it in the first place. So this patient had been with us for some time, and every night I walk by his room he's in the same position, standing facing the wall with his back to the door. No matter how long I stand there, he doesn't move. This is nothing new though, as I've seen a number of patients with catatonia before. They just stand or sit there with a blank or sometimes fearful expression and react to nothing. So the scary part for me was when I passed by his room, walking quietly so as not to wake any patients, and I peek into his room through the window. He's standing facing the wall. Just before I'm about to continue on with my rounds, I see his head turn, like he heard a voice. He turns around with his empty eye sockets and looks at me. "My name, is that you?" I nearly shit myself. I didn't even know this patient knew my name, let alone that he could tell somehow that it was me standing there. I probably should have reassured him that I was real, but in that moment I was so scared I just kept on walking. There is a legend or folklore, some would say, of seeing the dog in trucking. Kind of like seeing a black cat or having one cross in front of you. It's a sign of bad luck in the trucking industry. Most of the time the saying goes, if you see the black dog, about to die, GTFO the road ASAP. So fast forward to around June-ish of 2020. So right in the middle of the pandemic. I'm out driving somewhere in the desert of Arizona on I-10 East. It's around 3 or 4 a.m. I had been driving for around 8 hours at that time and had already taken my 30 minutes break around 4 hours before then. While I'm driving, mind you, no one is around and I hadn't seen a car or truck in more than 20 miles or so, I see what looks like a shadow figure off on the right-hand emergency lane. I shake it off thinking it's just my eyes playing tricks on me. So I light up a cigarette, open the window to let the cool air in and sit up straight in the chair and try to focus. I keep thinking to myself, only 2 or 3 more hours and I'm done for the day and can get some sleep. Not maybe 5 to 10 minutes later, I see the same figure shaped like a wolf with a arched up back. All black, no eyes or teeth or anything. So I turn my bright lights on, which in a semi is like lighting up a football field, and the figure is gone. I'm sitting thinking, WTF? So I shake my head and slap myself on the cheeks to wake myself up. About 30 minutes later, same thing happens except the figure is lurching towards the middle of the lane. I'm the only one on the road. No one behind me, or in front, and no one has passed me from the other side in about 15 minutes. So as the figure lurches towards the middle, I swear to God, I see what looks like eyes, yellow eyes, looking straight at me, so I hit the brakes hard, don't lock them up, and swerve a little. I'm sitting there screaming and cursing like a mother ducker. I almost went off the side of the road and put that damn 78,000 pounds truck and trailer in the ditch. I pull over on the side of the highway. Pop my brakes, stand up inside the truck and take a few deep breaths. Trying to rationalize WTF I just saw. Then I remember the folklore about seeing the dog. I literally say out loud, duck this, I'm going to bed at the next rest stop. So I roll up to the next rest area about 25 miles down the road and call it quits for the night. To say it scared me is an understatement. I slept so damn good that night, after having adrenaline pulse through my veins. Never again did I see that figure. Worked the night shift as a nurse in a general hospital. There were the normal scary things, like the haunted rooms where the bell rang itself every night and you never saw somebody in there or leaving the room. The hospital was built in long hallways with doors on the left and right. In the old part the rooms were quite small and the lights gave you more shadows than light. The scariest thing took place over a few days. It started with female patients ringing for the nurse and telling there was a ghost tickling their feet in their sleep. They all told the same story about a slender figure in a white gown standing at the end of their bed with a grin on its face which looked more like a skull and just tickling their feet. There was no sign of anybody coming or leaving, but the heavy doors from the stairways to the hallways was open at all time, so no sign there. On male patient on the opposite hallway across the staircase told us about somebody staying next to his bed every night just watching him sleep. It was the other patient from his room just standing there. This man had really bad dementia and his day-night rhythm completely changed. It was also him sneaking in other rooms and tickling the women's feet. We don't know how we never catched him. So we told the doctors and they tried to sedate him when he started to act violently against us after discovering his nightly actions and trying to stop him. Cause of his dementia, it had the opposite effect and he got more crazy and agitated. We closed all doors to protect the other patients and he tried to get in and even tried to convince me he was someone else, couldn't see through the doors, and to open for him. Changed his voice, told different stories like 5 to 6 times a night. It got really scary. He was finally moved to another facility.